Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of JDM Masters, and today we have a classic Honda Integra with us. We are at Yokohama, and this is the Yokohama Bay Bridge. It's running along the one-gun line all the way to Haneda Airport into Tokyo, but we're here to present to you a classic Honda car. It is a 1991 Integra XSI. Now this model is really significant in the history of Honda because it was the first Honda to use the legendary DOHC VTEC high-power engine. Even a lot of Honda fans are not aware of the existence of this car. It precedes the EF9 Civic SIR to use B16A engine. Now this is a true JDM model that was available through 1989 until 1993 before the DC2 with the B18C came up. So this Integra uses the 1.6 liter. The chassis is shared with the Civic EF series, which appeared in 1987. Now, at that time, Honda was about to change from the previous model called the quaint Integra, and the engineers decided that they wanted to make a revolutionary new engine with higher horsepower. So this one thing I like about this car, it's a mix of 80s design, low profile, and the next generation engine with DOHC VTEC, high power, electronic EFI, and just basically that same drivetrain that would last until the year 2000, ending with the Civic Type R EK9 that's in the background over there. What's your favorite part about driving one of these?
Not so much this vehicle in general, but vehicles from the 90s are really driver oriented. There's no extras,
I agree.
No power, anything. The only thing this car has, power steering. And even that, you kind of feel more connected to the road than a lot of the newer cars, because electric steering and ABS and all this. This vehicle doesn't have ABS even.
Right.
So I like the feel of every option.
I agree with that because I have driven mostly 90s cars, and I had an EG, I had an EK, DC2, and like an A86, and a lot of these older cars. And I really agree about just how you said it's more driver oriented.
It's really raw.
It's raw. It's unfiltered. You know what I mean? Looking at the design, it's really clear that it's from the 80s, in fact the late 80s. It shares the same chassis as the EF9. You can see with the squarish front, right of the rake up to the top of the roof. It's a little bit rounded and it goes right out to the back and cuts off here, right down with the long bumpers. Side profile has straight lines, even with the door handles. It just screams 80s, but what really stands out in this particular design are these headlights. Unusually long because it houses all of the units, the low beam, the high beam, and also yellow fog lights hiding underneath here. I wonder where the air goes in. And if you look down, it's quite clear there's huge slats here. There's more than enough for intake into the radiator. I think it's an 80s thing to prioritize airflow and aerodynamics by having a grille-less design so you can have better CD values. Of course, the later Integra DC had a little opening, and then they kind of did away with that. But just this front mask is so iconic of the DA generation, and just one look and you know there's no other car that looks like this. Maybe the AE92 Sprinter Terreno had kind of longish lights, but I don't think it's as long as this one. Another design point that just screams 80s and early 90s design is what they call in Japan a hardtop. Now hardtop is basically a frameless door, as you can see here. This was something that was a design point of many cars in the 80s and 90s, and it just gives the profile a really beautiful pillarless design. Looking around the rear view, square long lights like this, which is quite common with late 80s and early 90s cars, but the design I think really matches the long headlights of the front, and being very distinctively Honda. You can see the progression from this to the later model DC2 and also the DC5, and these long square protruding out bumpers, another 80s point. And Luke sourced a HKS high power exhaust system from America and not from Japan. Apparently a Japanese HKS is only made to order a JDM part for a JDM car in Japan, but it's sourced from America. That's just fantastic. The 80s low profile of the dashboard. Of course, there is no airbags, there is no ABS. High quality fabrics that really looks like some tweed or some sofa from a doctor's waiting room. It really has a certain charm and that smell that you're kind of sitting in a living room or in a fashionable clothing store. And this is something that I really appreciate about 80s and 90s cars. You're really sitting a little bit, yet you have a very nice view for visibility and ease of driving. Now Luke's car is a very low mileage example with only 51,000 kilometers. It's obvious that the previous owner had kept this in immaculately good condition. Before he bought it, he said the car was sitting for 10 years not doing anything. There's almost no scratches or discoloring or cracks on the dashboard. It just looks like a museum piece. This is just amazing. Little bits like this, you can see how much money has been spent on it from the bubble economy. Like, can you imagine just the production cost of that temperature, digital gauge, these buttons, the aircons for the control, and hiding behind this little lid here are even more buttons to control it. Why would they even want to put a lid here? Now the gear shifter is not stock. Luke has put a little extender here with a spoon gear shift knob to bring it higher and closer to him. But being a low mileage car, all of the bushings feel really, really tight. And there's something I wanted to talk about, how 30 years ago Honda really put a lot of effort even to the small things like the shift feel. Most front wheel drive cars come with a cable shifter because the engine's in front and driving the cable to behind, and it usually feels a bit notchy and slidey, but this is a solid 2-rod shifter which makes it feel like an FR. Having bushes which are stiffer makes it really positive in gear change, and you just feel every mechanical motion as you slot it in from gear and downshift. Now, being an 80s car, there seems to be 2 compartments. You have your standard glove box here and also a second one on the top where you can put even more of your items like gloves. And apparently this is an 80s design cup holder, which isn't really a cup, it's like a balancer. Obviously, you'll spill your drink if you start driving. But then again, there are no real cup holders in the DA and the EF. So I guess you have to finish your drink before going driving. Did you know there's a VTEC controller?
I put that in.
You put that in? How did you even find it? It's an old school item.
In the States.
Oh my God! Now Luke has done a couple of upgrades to his car besides the shifter, and I see a classic spoon VTEC controller which he actually bought in the States. Now this is an old school computer device that changes the VTEC changeover point of the high cams by means of a volume adjuster. The 1980s old style Honda accessories logo right in the corner of these carpets are almost looks like they're unused. I mean, look, even the door panels right up to the buttons, the fabric on the door trim and the scuff plates, just the paint around this area. I mean, for a car made in 1991, we're talking about it's almost 30 years old. To find it in such good and clean condition is something I think that's quite unique to Japan. Focus enthusiast car that maybe true 80s or Honda fans can really share and appreciate, and I certainly do. This is another interesting item. Car being a hardtop frameless design, it has the OEM rain visor in one continuous line all the way up to the bottom of the A-pillar. Let's go around to the back. You have the aero deck shape that makes it a sort of a hatchback, but it's more of like a coupe hatchback and very common to cars of that era. And just look at this. The gas struts are still strong. Mostly cars of this era, you need the gas struts changed. And this car came originally equipped with the Honda original accessories gathers, high quality sound system, and even the parcel shelf still with the car and looking spotless and extremely clean. Really a lot of trunk room. You fold the seats down. I believe this can actually be a small little wagon, so being much more practical than the Civic. So coming to Japan and like finding one of these classics in such good condition, I mean, that's nearly impossible in America these days, isn't it? To
Very
find
much
something.
so, yes.
An example.
I think you'll probably have better luck on the west coast of America.
Right.
A lot of the people that I see that own them in very good shape are from California.
Now the heart of the DA6 Integra XSI is this 1.6 liter B16A DOHC VTEC. Now this was a very crucial point in Honda's history because they came from a very successful engine called the D series ZC engine, which was a similar 1.6 twin cam. This is before VTEC, but even that engine was revolutionary for the 80s because 1.6 liters, it produced 135 PS. Now, for the next generation, Honda's engineers decided that in order to not use turbochargers, and Honda are very proud of their F1 roots, and engines are just what Honda does best. So for the next generation 1989 Integra next series, they developed a whole new engine that could reach 100 horsepower per liter. So that means 160 horsepower from a 1.6. Now, at that time, there was no such engine, no other manufacturer who could achieve that without using turbochargers. Now, Honda, being Honda, takes its spirit from its founder, Soichiro Honda, who started the company with motorcycle racing. The orientation of the Civic B16A and also a lot of other series engines are actually the opposite direction of what transverse FF mounted engines are. It's facing with the transmission on the left side, the driver's side of the car, and the engine on the right side of the car. It actually gives better distribution to the right side, balancing it out. So probably not true if this car was sold in America, but I suspect that that's not the only reason. You see, having the engine in this orientation means it actually spins in the reverse or the opposite direction as normal engines. And this, according to some legends in Honda's folk history, that it was the same direction as the racing motorcycle's engine, and maybe just something with the airflow or the way the mechanism works. But whatever the reason, it was very unique for them to do that, because of the next generation K20 engine, they actually turned it the other way around. So if any of you know the reason why that Honda actually did this, please let us know in the comments. Now the DOHC VTEC engine, something that was designed pre-1990s, looking at this compared to the Toyota 4AG, it's got a very narrow valve angle, therefore a very narrow head. To get high power from a naturally aspirated engine was to make a wider angle valve, which was something that was used on Rover engines and also the Nissan and Mazda engines and the legendary 4AG as well. How did Honda manage to do a narrow compact valve angle and still achieving this high horsepower? Well, the secret is in here: variable timing electronic control. This mechanism was something that originated in their motorcycle models, but the motorcycle models VTEC was a bit rudimentary. It switched from 2-valve operation to 4-valve operation. So in order to achieve a high horsepower per liter, they started with a high revving, high power engine. So it was not the other way around, where they started with an engine that needed the high cams to get more power. It was actually a high revving engine with high horsepower that needed to be daily driven, and so friendly to drive with a lot of mid-range torque. And that's why VTEC was there, to make the lower RPM range be easy to drive, and you have a high RPM range to deliver the high horsepower. So basically, it's a racing engine design that could be used for the street, and that is what the DOHC VTEC is. So there's some mods done to this car. The air filter's not stock. Pod filter with a direct air intake, the strut bar here, and he also has cams from the DC2 Integra Type R, which gives a more aggressive lift and cam duration, probably gives a little more top-end power. Otherwise, the B16A engine had the same basic layout from the first generations up to the last generation here, the EK9. So both these engines have the codename B16, but the last alphabet, the A and B, is where the crucial difference is. The B16A uses a low height block, which you can see the block here, it's the same height as the transmission case, giving it, it's 1.6 liters. EK9's 1.6 liter is basically using a high block from the Integra Type R 1.8 and de-stroke to a 1.6 using longer con rods, but that's another subject to talk about at another time. So we have this plate right here, which is only on JDM Hondas. It's the Honda Motor Company is written in Japanese characters, and it has the DA6, which signifies exactly the spec it is. Now, JDM cars have their plate on the radiator core support versus export spec cars which have it on the firewall. Now, looking at this area, you can tell that it's a double wishbone suspension because the suspension strut mounts are far inside into the engine bay. The upper wishbones are located around here, which is quite similar to what you'll see maybe on a Skyline or on a Supra. Luke's car has a Ohlins DFV with spring rates 10 kgs in the front and 8 in the back. And driving it just now, it really felt like the car had really good damping and it wasn't bouncing. Perhaps a really good upgrade to an old car with even old suspension like this. It's funny because the DA generation Integra was not really used in N1 or Taikyu races in the early 90s. The Civic EF9 SIR was used a lot more. Probably that's why there are not many of these in production numbers. According to some unofficial sources, maybe only 8,000 of these coupes of all ranges were sold. So I've personally never seen one in the flesh in all my time I've been in Japan. I was just so excited to be able to drive and review this car. So Luke, like any true Honda and classic car enthusiast, will actually be bringing this car back to America and he will be keeping it stock. He's going to restore it. So follow him on his journeys down here and we're going to check out his comments and his feelings about this car. It's quite interesting because even though these old Honda cars of FF, front-wheel drive, the Type R's more so, but they do have a little bit of a tail-out stance when you're going hot into a corner, and that's just the way Honda FFs are set up. If you can get it right, get around the corner, but if you kind of overcook it, yeah, it does actually spin out compared to like I've driven Toyota and Mitsubishi FF cars, and they just tend to understeer more. But I would say, yeah, if you get the balance right on these Hondas, it's really, really nice. And I think that's due to the double wishbone suspension design on the front and the rear.
Now, I was wondering if you knew the difference between the XSI and the RSI.
Tell me.
I don't know. That's why I was asking. I hope you knew.
Oh, as far as I know,
because it still has the VTEC engine, correct?
Right. The RSI was a stripped-out version without power windows, without aircon. It's like a race base, which they call it. But the EF9, they had SIR and SIR2. So the SIR2 was the more comfort version, but the SIR1 was more the race base. And then for the EK, they called it just Type R race base.
I guess that makes sense because going back to Mitsubishi, the Evo line RS models are the similar.
That's right. Very, very
crank
similar.
windows.
Yeah.
Basic seats. No radio.
No radio.
Yeah.
Like black door handles and stuff. Yeah. Just they had a little funny naming procedure.
Hi, my name is Luke Linares, and this is my 1991 Honda Integra XSI. I've been here in Japan for about 3 years now, working with the US Air Force. About to leave here soon, and obviously I can't come to Japan without taking an iconic car like this back to the States with me. I've loved Integras since back in 2004 when I bought my very first one. In America, you're not going to find a more cleaner representation of the Honda Integra that I have here. So I want to bring this one back to the States with me. And my plan is to restore it back to original condition. Also add a few things which I've picked up along the way. I have a full OEM optional aero kit that I've yet to install. That's also in the States. I'm not sure if it was an option here in Japan, but I was able to find it in the States. The car will be shipped back to the States within the next couple weeks. And then from there, we'll start working on restoration. I've also owned DC2 Integras, and I've always loved the DA6 much more for its body lines, the raw feel of driving the car. The DC doesn't compare, in my opinion. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people in the comments that will have something to say about that.
So I hope you guys enjoyed the review of this very clean Integra XSI DA6. And follow us for more adventures, and we'll be going to review more cars. And thank you, Luke, for letting me see your car. So that's all from us. I'll see you in the next episode. Peace out.